term and welcome to Art 1010. I'm very grateful you guys are able to show up. And another correlation I found is that not only is there a correlation between people that show up to these meetings live and A's, but people that actually turn their video on uh, and A's. There's a correlation there as well. So good job, Jackson. I'm not trying to elicit brown nosing. I'm just making an observation from a highly scientific statistical survey of my past experience. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about what to expect during the term, some things that are moving forward, and then three specific things about this first module. One concern that people have a lot is regarding due dates. Canvas will show you things that are coming up because they are due. It doesn't have. It seems that that's what triggers the notifications, which is the due dates that the teacher assigns to different readings and things like that. So one of the reasons why I put due dates on is that you know what's coming up and that you can stay on track. This is a online course. It's essentially a self-study course. And so everything technically is due on the last day of class, but I guarantee you will get a better grade if you do your best to stay on top of things as they come along. Now, that's also to say, if you see a due date and you turn it in a week late, you do not get points docked off or anything. If you're having an issue, if you're going to be out of town because you're traveling with your team or something like that for a while, just drop me a line and let me know so I don't start fretting about things. But again, the due dates are there specific. Oh, hey, Camille. The due dates are there specifically so that Canvas lets you know what's coming up, not so that I have an opportunity to dock you points. You guys, you're professionals in your own right. You're professional students. You're professionals in your secular careers. You have enough going on, and that's why you decided to take an online course. And I think I'd be kind of a jerk if I wanted to hold everybody to due dates as well. I am a jerk, but I'm a jerk for other reasons. Now, I also wanted to give kind of an overview as well as what to expect during the semester. I get a lot of questions about what supplies do we need. Last semester, I actually had a couple of people complaining about how expensive the class was. This class, on average, costs less than half of the state average for Art 1010. So it is really inexpensive. There are some expenses to take, like you might have to buy paints, but I want to do everything as much as I possibly can so that you use the supplies you already have in your home. Everybody does need access to a sketchbook, and if you guys are interested, I will show you how to do bookbinding. And you can make your own sketchbook really rather easily. But if what you have is an extra notebook from another class that you're not using, use that as your sketchbook. Do not feel like you need to go out and buy something specific just for this class. You might have to buy papers, you might have to get a paint set, but as much as possible, I want to make sure that everybody uses the stuff that they already have in their own apartment. Beg, borrow, or threaten from neighbors and roommates. And then your final project, it's required that you use what you already have in your apartment. Then that kind of informs the kind of thing that you make. So generally, the state average for Art 1010 is $125. I try to keep it under 75. So, and I've also had people that spend a grand total of $15 during the whole term, just because they lived with their family and they had a lot of junk in the basement. So that helps. Another thing that students get concerned about is regarding grading. Most of the time, you get most of the points for showing up and trying. very few of you are going to be professional artists already. That's why you're taking Art 1010. It's an introduction to art. And so most of the grading comes from the idea that you're trying, and you're trying honestly the best that you can. So I don't expect people to produce masterworks, and I don't expect a person the first time you pick up a pencil or a pen to draw a masterwork. And that's not what this class is about. The class is mostly about you doing what you can to learn the skills necessary to enjoy what other people have made, to enjoy attempts that you have yourself in making things, but mostly to appreciate the work that people go into making stuff. And that's primarily what this class is about. I wanted to talk a little bit about me because I'm the one who's operating the Teams meeting. I'm the teacher, and it's all about me anyway. But well, I wanted to give a little thank you, Jackson. You understand my sense of humor. But I wanted to talk a little bit about where I'm coming from so you guys are aware of that. And I also wanted to, like I said, talk a little bit more about what to expect for the rest of the semester. And then we'll talk about three specific things regarding this first module. For me, I've I started off as an engineer and a mathematician, and I segued into art. Um, I was in an engineering class, and they were all getting excited about the cement canoe competition. And I thought to myself, yeah, that's great and all, but I don't really want to do that. And I started looking at other things. I've been doing stained glass already, and I've been told very repeatedly that stained glass is just a craft and it's not an artistic medium. And so I started looking when I moved to Utah. I started looking around for different opportunities. And so, trained as a mathematician, I also went into uh, computer engineering as well. And from both of those things, it's a natural progression to move from that into stained glass and watercolor. So that's what I did, and I got my first job as a stained glass artist because the person running the studio was tired of stopping what he was doing and ringing me up. I was hired specifically so that I could operate the cash register for my own sales. And since then, I've built. I don't. I It's over 12,000 windows, but I built a lot of stained glass, and a lot of the historical glass that's in the state, I most likely have had a hand in helping to repair or to curate. But I also do a lot of glass for things like temples and private dwellings. I also do glass sculpture. I help set up the hot shop at BYU, and I was really fascinated with things like traditional arts and the intersection of art and religion. And so my degrees are in the intersection between art and religion, and with a lot of focus on things like Islamic art. A few years ago, I was invited to Iran and received a fellowship to study Islamic art. I also am an interfaith chaplain and a certified alchemist, if you can believe such a thing. But most of these things are because I came across somebody. You know what they call appropriation in the art world? It's just stealing. And I came across a lot of artists that were appropriating other elements of other people's cultures, and I thought that's nice and everything, but if you don't understand where it comes from, you are essentially just stealing. And so instead of blindly appropriating stuff, I started trying to find out the culture behind what had produced the art that I was borrowing from. I was raised with three Navajo brothers and a Shoshone sister, and so I have a really interesting background. But because of that perspective, in finding the cultural context of the artwork that I was interested in exploring, I kind of backed into becoming an expert in things like Sufism and Rumi and Islamic art. I hadn't intended to become one, but two universities in Iran thought that I was. And so I've done quite a bit of different kinds of things, two-dimensional and three-dimensional as well. And because I work in the professional sector, I understand that you guys are under a lot of pressure um, for your regular everyday jobs, and that's why I want you. I don't want you to really stress about this class. I don't want to be an additional stressor in your lives. This is this class is supposed to be so that you have something to enjoy and look forward to, not to add an additional stressor. And if you guys have, I gave you that information about my background. Also, if you guys have any questions about Bigfoot or Atlantis, I can speak to that as well. But I've been doing this for over 30 years, and that does not necessarily mean that I'm an expert. What that does mean is that I found a way to recover from almost any mistake. And so nothing is permanently damaged, nothing is permanently destroyed. You can usually come back from almost anything. Sometimes you do have to start over, but most of the time you can recover. And I think that that's really the mark of excellence in the work that you do on your own. People look up to you in the workplace when they know it doesn't matter what happens. You know, Cheyenne will keep her head, she'll keep cool, and she'll be able to work through it. That becomes the mark of the real professional, I think, that you are able to work through whatever mistakes other people throw at you. Another thing I wanted to speak to a little bit is about art. And I'd like to ask for a definition, but I think that's going to be kind of difficult. How many of you have heard the phrase, beauty is in the eye of the beholder?
I've heard it.
You've heard it?
Hmm.
And I've heard a lot of university level teachers as well talk about, yes, Cameo. You heard it as well? I'm sorry, the microphone's still off.
Yes, I did hear it.
Okay. It's, that is something that, and Nicole, uh, a lot of the times people hear that they reference Shakespeare when he said a rose by any other name would smell as sweet, and they claim that that's what that means, and that's not. It has nothing to do with that. The idea of beauty in the eye of the beholder is something that is tossed around by artsy fartsy people because they think that that gives them some sort of validity for a perspective that I think is not entirely accurate. The phrase "beauty is in the eye of the beholder" emerged. I think it was first put in print in about 1812, uh, and is a product of the Industrial Revolution, where people began to commodify art and turned it into a product rather than an element of beauty. If beauty is in the eye of the beholder, then it removes any sort of a shared standard of appreciation. There's absolutely no way for us to develop any sort of sense of shared community when we talk about aesthetics in an art setting. Because if everything is relative, there's no way to share your own perspective. Rather, I would like to say that art. I think a relatively workable definition of art is that it is the product or the process of of building something new, and that can apply to absolutely anything. If one of you, if somebody is a nursing student, if somebody is early childhood development, if somebody stocks shelves at Amazon, whenever you are applying yourself and asking for outside help, and you can, um, our ancestors referred to it as inspiration, which is comes from Latin and it means the breath of the world. Um, you could call it higher order. You could call it from coming from your better self or the universe in general. It doesn't really matter. When you open yourself up for that kind of outside guidance, whatever it is that you do, if you're farming in a field, if you're driving cattle, if you're changing the course of a stream, in the mountains, or if you're repairing um, a hiking trail, it really doesn't matter. When you're doing something that and you're using or accessing something beyond yourself when you do it, you are in essence creating something new, and that is the process of art. And that opens the world to, I mean, it opens the idea of art to an awful lot of different things. But what that also means is that every individual is an artist as well. It's probably something that most of you have not ever considered before. But that's the kind of working definition of art that I use. Functionally, in the world today, art is the immaterial, useless bit that you display to show everybody your intellectual prowess, and I I guess there's some validity to that, but I think that's not what we're doing here. I'm hoping that you guys explore art from the perspective of asking for outside help. You know, asking for that outside help from, like I said, your higher self, your better self, your future self, even. Like who's the actor who played the lead in Lincoln Lawyer? Matthew McConaughey. He always talks about asking for help from his self in 10 years in the future. And I think that's a good perspective. You're asking for something beyond your immediate perspective, and um, when you do that, that actually helps you to produce something that's new and different. Another aspect of art is that it's communication. It's communication without the restrictions of words. The kindest and gentlest of the Nazi philosophers was a guy named Heidegger, who talked quite a bit about phenomenology. If any of you come across that in the future, but the idea that how we react and how we remember our reactions informs quite a bit about re, uh, how we see reality. But one of the things he talks about is that every time we use a word in a language, that removes the possibility of all other words that we could have used. We've narrowed it down to one singular word that we're using. The nice thing about art is we're communicating, but since we're not using words, it can mean a lot more and it can say a lot more. So that's something else to consider. The three elements in this module that I wanted you to think about is first, criticism, second, the Lion King, and third, accessing the connection between the two halves of the brains. Now, have you guys heard of this idea that there are left-brained and right-brained people? All of you have heard of that, right?
Yes.
Okay. The left-brained are generally going to be, I can't remember what it is. One of the hemispheres generally going to be more analytical, and the other hemisphere is generally going to be more creative. I'm sorry, I can't remember. I think it's if you're right-brained, you're more creative, and if you're left-brained, you're more analytical. Is that right? Something like that. But the real and you've probably also heard about different writing styles, have or learning styles. I'm sorry, Nicole. What did you say? The note just showed up really briefly and then it disappeared. I know you don't have a mic, but you said you typed in something about the left brain. Could you do that again? Okay, left is analytical, right is creative. Okay, thank you. Excellent. Um, most of us have a leaning towards an analytical or a creative bent, I think, but I really doubt that anybody is strictly one path or the other. Most of us are struggling at integrating those two things, and that is perfectly fine. What is interesting to me is that when you open yourselves up, if you consider yourself as a creative person and you open yourself up to a more analytical approach, or if you consider yourself a very math oriented type person and you open yourself up to a more creative approach, it's astounding the kinds of things that you can start building. Uh, for example, I took a writing class alongside my computer language course, and it was absolutely fascinating to me how they informed each other. And I was able to write programs that the teacher never saw before, which not is not always a compliment. But the teacher was really impressed with how the programs turned out because they presented solutions nobody had thought about. Simply because I was also taking a writing class and I was thinking about more creative solutions already. I have a brother who is a biostatistician who and he's also a musical composer. And his work is very interesting because his math stuff it feels more balanced and is almost pretty to look at if you can believe that. And his music feels very articulated. And it's a big part of that is because he's tried very hard to integrate those two ways of thinking. So that's something to consider. And we also talk about, well, I'm a visual learner or I'm a tactile learner or whatever. And the reality is there are different paths of learning, but everybody is a mix, and you can benefit from exploring those things that you feel that you're not necessarily very good at. You know, trying to find a safe place to explore those within, because that will also help to integrate your brain and help make you a more effective and flexible learner. This kind of thinking, I know you think I'm just rambling, and I probably am, but this kind of thinking, what's really interesting, the last 10 years, it has been shown that it helps stave off the advancement of dementia and the symptoms of Alzheimer's in people as they get older, using this kind of idea of working actively to explore different ways of learning and working actively to integrate both the analytical and creative sides of your brain together. So that's what this first module kind of touches on a little bit, and that's why we're doing blind contour drawings. And again, these assignments, you're not graded on your technical skill because the assumption is that's why you're taking the class to develop your skills. You are graded on how hard you're trying. And that's going to be pretty much true for most of the term. The second thing to talk about is the tools of artistic critique. We'll talk about more about that in the next week or two. But what are some of the words that you think of when you hear the word critique or critic?
Rude.
What's that, Cheyenne?
When I think of it, I thought of rude, but when I like read through it, it made me not think of rude. Like it made me think of someone who's like trying to help you get better.
Well, but I like that first reaction, and that's true for most of us. I mean, would you agree with that, Jackson, Nicole, and Cameo, that when you hear critique or critic, the first thing you think about is rude? Yeah,
Yes.
and that's what we're trained to think. I mean, that's what we come across, and the way I find that kind of I find that extremely negative in an art setting because, like what Cheyenne said, it's the idea of criticism or critiquing should not lead us directly to being rude to begin with. Let's see. Okay, I'm Cameo. I see your hand up, and I don't know. Okay, I'm going to lower the hand because I think you already talked. Is that right? I hope so. Let's see. All
Sorry,
right,
I
there
didn't
we
know
go.
it was up.
Oh no, that's totally fine. Um, Critical thinking is the basis for critiquing or critique, and critical thinking means thinking with intent. It's purposeful thinking. It has nothing to do with being a jackwagon or being a jerk to the people. It's all about thinking through your words before you open your mouth and use them. So, for example, if somebody comes to you and shows you something that they've made, um, you can say, "Oh yes, it's pretty," and the person walks away. Yeah, they got a little warm fuzzy, but what good does that do? Nothing. Pretty has very little to do with um, art. It's pretty is very much a reaction to what a person sees. So if you say something is pretty, you're just sharing that with them your reaction. But if somebody shows you has made, like this is just a regular a roll of masking tape. But if somebody made this and approached and showed it to you, and you start thinking about it with critical thinking or intentful thinking, you're going to say, I see you spend a lot of time with this. It's about a 4.5, 5 inch circle with I see the outside rim is blue and it looks like there's a lot of stripes of blue, and the inside it has white on the inside and there's a hard core on the inside. It's very tightly made. The tape wraps around itself very tightly. So if you made this yourself, it's amazing how much time you spent on this. It really, you worked hard at getting everything lined up and precise. Now, saying something like that is quite a bit different than saying something's pretty, isn't it? Now, if we go further and the person is saying, I know something is missing, I don't know quite what it is, you use your skills of critical thinking or the tools of artistic critique that we'll talk about. You'll describe what you see, you'll talk about how you think they've made it, and then you'll speak a little bit to what you believe that their intent was behind it. And in that process, you are articulating what you're observing, what you're thinking about what you're observing, and how you're feeling about what you're thinking about what you're observing. And during that whole entire thing, most of the time it generates a conversation where that element that feels off or unbalanced, you're able to identify it, not just identify what it is, but also able to articulate how to fix it. But it's because you're looking at something closely. And we'll talk about that more, and you'll do a couple exercises where you'll have a roommate or some other unwitting victim, volunteer, that you're going to go through the tools of artistic critique with. You'll ask them for an opinion about an object, then you'll apply the tools of artistic critique with them listening, and then ask them again if their opinion changes. And what's fascinating is 99% of the time, if somebody's actually listening to you as you talk about it, they're going to be amazed at the new things they see, specifically because you're able to help them look at it with intent. Isn't that interesting? But this doesn't just, the reason why I'm doing this, it doesn't just apply to art, it applies to absolutely anything. And when we talk about that more, I'll show you how to apply it to whatever the field is that you're in. And this is scrubbing floors at a restaurant all the way to uh, working on electronics for another Mars mission. So I want you to think about that in the back of your head as we move forward. But the third thing was, does anybody remember what the third thing was now that I blathered on for what seems like an eternity?
What third thing? Like the three elements?
No, the third thing I was mentioning, we're going to talk about the blind contour and the two hemispheres of the brain. We're going to talk about tools of artistic critique. And then the third thing was a person.
I just remember Lion King.
That's right, the Lion King. Now, I'm not talking about the Disney thing at all. I I will be willing to bet that none of you guys have heard of this person at all in your entire lives. His name is Sundiata. He's a 14th century conqueror, world builder, and he actually conquered more lands than any of the Caesars and Alexander the Great. What he would do is he would go into an area that was ruled by a tyrant and sorcerers, had the people in fear. He would conquer the tyrant and the sorcerers, and then he would proceed to uh, bring freedom of religion to people so they could choose what they wanted to think about the universe. And he also would support people in public education so they could learn how to read. Not because he wanted to necessarily make people smarter, but his primary interest was to help people so they would no longer become victims to tyrants. With the ability to read, they would be able to make contracts and hold people to those contracts. And this happened between, he conquered an area in just along the southern Sahara Desert from Nigeria almost all the way to Ethiopia. There are more than a half a dozen countries today that have their roots in Sundiata and his world building. Called the Old Mali Empire. The reason why this is interesting to me is that as you learn about critical thinking and applying the tools of artistic critique, I want you to look at the artifacts that we have from Sundiata's work, his kingdom, and you will be able to use those tools to be able to describe the styles that you see, uh, interpret the materials that were used, why they built the things that they did, and then one of your final projects for this course will be making something that you are familiar with, but that the Mali kingdom needed and didn't have. And I have had people make a weight bench that you would have seen 700 years ago in the Malinese Empire, um, as well as things like an iPad screen. So lots of, or a bicycle. What would a bicycle have looked like if I was living in Mali? And it's what is really interesting is that when um, you guys apply yourself to thinking with intent and being able to describe what you see, it's fascinating to me what you come up with using your creative skills to build something that didn't exist 700 years ago but should have. And it's I've seen you guys produce some amazing things. So that's one thing to look forward to. Yay, exciting, lots more work. We're also going to do a very short bit about I have a very small module that we're going to fit in that just deals briefly with the ideas of anti-racism and becoming a collaborator for other success. Art is, or real art is never jealous. There's no reason to be. There is an infinite opportunity to create an infinite number of things. There's absolutely no reason for anybody to be jealous. And so one of the things that we can do as artists, as uh, people beginning in a path of art, in whatever the field that we're in, is to be a collaborator with for other people's success. As people around you get better and you contribute to that, it only helps you to become better as well. And that's something to think about. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about really is I want you to think about the question, whose voice is valid in art? And to talk about that, I wanted to give you a little bit of background. Does anybody know how old the universe is? The latest thing that I read is that it's roughly about 17 billion years old. The Earth is right around 4 billion years old. The sun is about 6 billion years old. But what I'm saying is that the universe is old. That is very, very, very old. Hugely old. And the universe is big. I mean, it is so big that every few years, NASA is able to see orders of magnitude more into the universe with the greater telescopes and the greater computer engineering that they use to interpret the images from those telescopes. And they're finding that there's more and more stuff out there. It's just hugely vast. For all intents and purposes, the universe is essentially infinite. So think about those two things. With the age of the universe, are you guys familiar with the idea of cause and effect or action and reaction? For every action, there's a reaction. For every effect, there was an initial cause. And every cause produces an effect. Are you guys familiar with this? No.
Yes.
Yeah. Knowing that the universe is 17 billion years old, one thing that we can think about is the realization you are the result, each of you is the result of actions and reactions throughout that 17 billion year lifespan of the universe. And each of you is the ultimate result or consequence of 17 billion years worth of activity. So when you start thinking to yourself, what do I have to offer? How is my voice relevant? The universe essentially spent 17 billion years making you exactly the person you are through all those chains of events coming together to produce the individual that you are right now today. And so, if the universe has spent so much energy producing the person that you are, then it's kind of a waste of time to doubt your own validity, isn't it? If the universe thinks you're valid, then you probably are. I would think so. But that is also true for everybody around you. With that much energy expended to make you exactly the person you are right now today, your voice has validity, your voice has value, and everybody else's voice has value as well. And if we think about how vast the universe is, any direction that you point in, you're going to be able to continue a line out essentially to an infinite length in any direction out from you, which essentially Ibn Arabi, who was a 13th century Muslim philosopher, said that essentially makes you the center of the universe. Would you agree with that? If from the point that you're at, you can point in any direction and the universe extends in the same amount infinitely out beyond you, that makes you the center of the universe, doesn't it? But the other thing is, everybody around you is just as equally the center of the universe, too. So, those two the ideas together, that you are the center of the universe and everyone else is as well, coupled with the idea that the universe spent 17 billion years making all of us exactly the people that we are, that lends a certain amount of validity to your voice, doesn't it? But that also lends a certain amount of validity to the voices of those around you, doesn't it? It does that as well. The point of this is that as we move forward, I want everybody to realize that what they have to say is worthwhile, and what everybody else has to say is worthwhile too. Whether or not you agree with them, it doesn't really matter. When somebody speaks, because their voice is valid, we have the opportunity to be respectful when they open their mouth. So I want you to think about that as well, or when as they start to create. So that's something else to think about. When we get to that short module where we will be talking about collaborating for other people's success, we'll deal with that a little bit more, that those ideas a little bit more. But between now and then, just have that bubbling in the back of your heads. Everybody's voice is valid, and it not only is everybody's voice valid, but it's absolutely vital to create art. I think uh, being able to appreciate what everybody else brings to the table. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that everybody's going to produce work that you enjoy or work that you even think is pretty. That's almost beside the point. Beauty, the word beauty, has very little to do with pretty. Beauty is more, it speaks more to the perceptible quality of truth and honesty as opposed to whether or not you like something. Have you ever been out in the in nature and had any sort of a kind of experience where you felt tiny compared to the mountains you were walking beside? Has anybody felt that, where the nature that you're in, it doesn't quite feel threatening, but it feels like it may not want you there necessarily? Has anybody felt that, where it's just a little bit dangerous? Uh,
Yes, for sure.
yeah, and that
Hmm.
is an expression of beauty, but it's definitely I don't think it's pretty. I mean, I have any of you seen a bison or a moose up close and personal?
Yes.
Yes.
Um, I do not think that a moose is very pretty, but it is definitely beautiful. And I know of a couple instances where people tried to headbutt a moose with their truck, and the moose walked away, and their truck didn't. That's
Losers.
yeah, exactly. But I think so when we talk, and we'll talk about more about that as well. There's a guy named Albrecht Dürer who was the most amazing dry point etch um, artist in Europe. I think that Europe has produced. I don't know. There might be some others that come close, but Albrecht Dürer talked about the pillars of art, and one big one of that is honesty. And I think that that's what the beauty is, a reflection of honesty, whether or not we want to hear it. And sometimes, if you have somebody in your family or your circle of friends that you really respect, and you've had that opportunity where you've done something stupid, and they sit you down and tell you to straighten up, and you listen to it, it's not what you want to hear. Sometimes it feels like somebody's peeling scabs off your back, but it's what you need to hear. And it's, an honest exchange, and you become a better person for it. That's the kind of beauty I think that is behind the most positive aspects of art. When you come before something, you experience it, and whether or not it hurts, you walk away a better person. So hopefully that's something else to think about. Now, I don't want to be here much longer, just a couple more minutes, but I would like people to ask questions, and I'd like each of you to ask a question. You can ask a question for yourself, or if you don't have a question yourself, ask something that you think somebody else in the class might be interested to know regarding this module and what we're doing moving forward. Who would like to? Cameo.
Jackson, do you remember me from high school?
That is not the kind of question I was thinking about.
I'm a little shocked too. Maybe were we in the you in FFA?
High school.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Hi, nice to see you.
Okay, let me clarify. Does anybody have a question regarding this class?
I do have a question. Sorry.
Okay, Jackson.
So, maybe this is self-explanatory, but when it comes to turning in our artwork, I would assume it's just like uploading a picture to Canvas.
Yeah, that is a really good that brings me to something that's really important to talk about. When you take a photo, um, Canvas responds readily to JPEG and PDF and Word docs. Okay, so um, when you take a photo, I would like you to, when you submit it, bring it down to medium range memory, not the highest resolution, because the highest resolution can overload the Canvas system. So mid-range resolution is pretty good. And make sure that it is a PDF or a JPEG or a Word doc. Sometimes there's a problem with getting to Google Docs as well. And sometimes when people turn in things like that, I'll just put a zero and say, please resubmit this in a different format. And that's what you'll need to do for the credit. So that's a really good question. So I'm saying mid-range memory for the image. And then what are the three different formats?
PDF,
JPEG. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
that's
Go
one.
ahead, Jackson.
a PDF, a JPEG, or a Word doc.
Yes,
Yes.
excellent, perfect. Those are the three. Those are the three best formats to put them in. Excellent. And again, mid-range memory.
Usually, if you
Like,
take them on your phone, do they work? Or would we need to
um,
make them smaller?
it depends. If you have an older phone, it usually is okay. But the new phones, I would rather. I found they have an HEIC format, and that Canvas has a really hard time reading that. So the best thing to do is to email it to yourself and save it as a mid-memory JPEG.
Okay.
Okay. So
On
it takes a
our
couple minutes, but yes, Cheyenne.
on our assignments, not really assignments, but on Tuesday, were you just the notifications for Tuesday, were those just kind of like instructions, like to like introduce you more to the class? Because I
Well,
didn't see if there was
the
like an
readings,
assignment out of it.
that is a really good question. The readings I put as an assignment to get them read by a certain date because I want you to read them before our class meeting
Okay.
so we can have something to talk about. And that is a really good question. It is not an assignment per se, but Canvas is reminding you, yes, get this read before we get together for class. And most of those readings are going to be under 10 minutes. And I will also have some videos to watch. Like in this first module, I have you watch a video where two art historians talk about Henry Moore sculpture. And I want you just to watch that video. You don't have to take notes or anything, but I want you to think about that and have that again bubbling in the back of your brain because we will refer to it and watch it again in a future module when we talk about um, art criticism
Okay.
or the tools of artistic critique. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. All right. So, Nicole, can you, I have the chat open. Could you type in a question that you have or a question that you think somebody else in the class might have?
While we're waiting, I might have a question.
Okay.
How do you say your last name?
My last name is pronounced Kasarak.
Kasarak? Okay.
Yes, it originally comes from Slovenia. That's where my family's from.
Oh, wow. Okay.
A couple generations ago. Yeah, if you guys want to see what kind of art that I've done, you can look my name up on the internet. And I have an exhibit right now that I've curated and put together that's going to be opening later on, first part of next week. It'll be up for almost 2 months. It's about alchemy, where I invited about 8 other artists to put their work together. So if anybody's going to head up north to West Valley City, uh, that exhibit's up there, and you can see some work there too. Have you guys been to the Electric Theater in St. George?
Yes.
No.
Okay. Right next to the Electric Theater is a set of galleries as well, and the galleries, it's actually not, it's one gallery, but there's a lot of artists that have their stuff in there, and it's not all that, it is a bit of a walk from campus. It's a couple, but it shouldn't be too hard to get to. If you guys want to see some really interesting stuff, I would heartily recommend going to the the art cooperative that's right next to the electric theater. Okay, so Nicole, you think we've covered most of the questions that you had already? Okay, then for attendance, this is kind of weird because it's an online class. To get credit for attendance, what you'll do is either attend this, or you'll watch the video that I post in for that week in the attendance module. And what you'll do in the response box for the assignment is just write 3 things that you learned. Like for example, I learned today that Jackson likes John Wayne. I learned that Cameo knew Jackson in high school, and I learned that Nicole's mic doesn't work on her computer today. But I think that I'm being kind of flippant, but I would prefer that you talk about things that you actually did learn that were useful. But it just shows that you were either watched the video or attended our Teams meeting, and that's how you get credit for it. All right. You guys don't have to wait for me to post the video because you lived the experience live, which is kind of cool because that means 30 years from now, you'll be sharing this day with your grandchildren. If you do, that'd be pretty sad. But in any event, I am looking forward to you guys seeing you all next week. And the last thing I wanted to mention is make sure that you check Canvas at least a couple times a week, because if you guys tell me that assignments are too difficult, or you want to do something else, or you think it might be too expensive, you let me know. We'll talk about it. And then if a lot of the times I will change the assignments to reflect what you guys want to do. And so it's important to keep coming back to um, Canvas and see, how we change things. We're not going to change things radically, but I'm more than happy to tweak them so that they're easier on you guys. All right?
Okay. Thank you.
Sure thing. I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I will look forward to seeing you all on Wednesday.
Thank you.
See you next
Have a good
Wednesday.
week.
All right.
Bye,
Thank you.
guys.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.